So, you know how people have been telling us for the better part of a year there's no CRT in the schools, that it is a figment, a bogeyman, a right wing dog whistle that has nothing to do with reality. It's not there. People are paranoid, etc. Well, I've said many times on the channel it is there, but people kept denying it. And now we have this. No critical race theory in schools. Here's the abundant evidence saying otherwise by John Morawski, Real Clear Investigations, out today. Actually, yesterday, December 22nd. I'm going to go through this article. I'm not going to read it all to you, but I'm just going to go through the important parts that make it clear that it is in the schools. Now, before I do, I want to make one thing very clear. There are probably schools, maybe yours is one of them, it is possible, where individual teachers are not doing this in their individual classrooms for a variety of reasons, including they disagree with it, okay? And that's great. That's awesome. That does not mean you're in the clear in the sense that, because this one teacher's not doing it, it's not being done by another teacher, maybe the art teacher, maybe the librarian, maybe who knows, the gym teacher, okay? I mean, if you're in a high school, it could be any number of teachers. Your kid has more than one teacher. But, not seeing evidence of it in like one place in your school or in one specific school, even in a district, because your kid has a teacher and they're in third grade or something, doesn't mean it's not in your district. It takes a lot more to go find it. And if it's in your district, as I've said before on this channel, think of it like roaches crawling across your counter in the middle of the day. If it's there openly, even in one teacher's classroom, that means that teacher knows that it's okay to do, and it's probably going to spread. It's probably the mainstream thought in the district, and other teachers are just trying to hold it back if they disagree with it. And you might be lucky to have had one of those teachers, but you might not be so lucky the following year and so forth. So the question becomes, are you comfortable with this in your district at all, whether it's in your school or your classroom or not? And more than that, are you comfortable as a taxpayer supporting this kind of an ideology being taught to students, even if you don't have kids at all? Or if you're someone like me who pays taxes and has kids, but doesn't have any in a public school district, yet you're still very concerned. You're very concerned about what this does to other people, other young people, children, young adults, etc., because they will someday be adults and running the country. And if you don't like these ideas being taught to the public's children, then you might want to know about it. You might want to, do something to try to stop it, because it is your tax dollars paying for it. It's not this neutral activity. It's political activity going on under the guise of education. What I find funny and not a little bit hypocritical is the same people pushing critical race theory into education will tell you that they must, because if they don't, somehow kids will be taught to be racist. That, they'll be taught it at home. They'll be taught it by the teachers in school if we don't retrain the older teachers and if we don't train new teachers to think this way. So they obviously appreciate that the way teachers are taught and the way teachers think has an impact on students. They obviously understand the power of that role, because that's their justification for using the role to push their particular brand of politics as a good thing. But there are those of us who say, nope, that's not your role at all. You are supposed to be neutral. You're supposed to teach them the skills they need to learn ongoing throughout their life to become individuals and believe what they want to believe, not what you want them to believe. That's the American ideal. Not just freedom of speech, but freedom of thought. Okay? And diversity of thought, even within the classroom, whether you agree with it or you don't. That you, the teacher, are supposed to be teaching them how to think, not what to think. So, like I said, I just find it ironic and hypocritical that people will say, but, you would like them to learn that. No, I wouldn't actually like them to learn the opposite version of politics. I'd like them to have no politics in the classroom. But let's take a look at how we know that this is in school districts around this country. Okay, so first of all, we know there have been claims over and over that it's not there. But here's what the research has found. Some high schools are already teaching lessons in units in CRT where students write papers demonstrating their facility with applying the theory, while other schools are introducing CRT concepts such as systemic racism, white privilege, microaggressions, implicit bias, and intersectionality. Now, before I continue, there are probably people watching this video who hear those terms and have already been taught that they are true, to the point where they don't understand what I'm trying to say. They're like, yeah, what? So they're being taught truth. What is your problem? Because that's what they've been taught already. They were taught that in college, or maybe they were taught that in school and we just didn't know what was happening before they graduated. What you need to know, folks, is the concept of systemic racism is a hotly debated topic. It is not a truth, objectively. Social scientists, if they're responsible, will tell you also that it's part of a theory. It is not a truth that you can measure scientifically. Same with white privilege. White privilege is even more murky. That is a concept created pretty much by one person and further developed by one other person, both of whom were white women. White women who arguably had the kind of privilege they're talking about and could very well be working out their demons by projecting it out onto the rest of the people in the world who look like them, and probably should be taken with a grain of salt, because there's all kinds of privilege and lack of privilege, and it doesn't just run to race. There's class, there's height, there's beauty, there's intelligence, there's intact families. There's all kinds of things you could label as privilege if you wanted to, but why would you bother? Is it really central to helping people be the best they can be and thriving? No, I don't think so. It really isn't. Finding some other external thing to blame for your life not being exactly as you want it to be isn't going to help you do better. Microaggressions, same concept. Teaching microaggressions is a very new concept. It is hotly debated. Many people, responsible psychologists included, think it sets children up for depression. When you teach people to look for slights, they will find them. When you teach them to react to slights, they will live in slight. They will live in that space where the smallest things bother them and undo their day. Or they will compromise their ability to have healthy relationships because they will be constantly on the lookout and mistrustful. It is not a net good to teach people that microaggressions are a thing, even if they were. Like, even if they're real, even if somebody commenting on your hair or what you eat or your music or so forth is meant as a little dig based on your race or your gender or your ethnicity, why would you stop and acknowledge that? Why would you let that person live in your head for a single second? If you really believe that they're doing it as some kind of code to discriminate against you, move on past them. Brush on by them. Why would you allow that to have any power over you? You see, that hurts you. It doesn't really hurt them. And then implicit bias, we've already debunked, not just me, but scientists have actually debunked. Even the people who created the survey said it's probably on par with your horoscope in the paper. And in fact, if you go to the implicit bias test, it says right at the bottom, this is not a scientific test. It's not backed up by scientific data. If anything, it's kind of a little parlor game. So implicit bias is another junk science concept, definitely not something that is considered a truth. And as far as intersectionality goes, again, that is a theory. So we have a collection of terms that either are representations of tenets of a theory, critical race theory, or they are a form of junk science that has worked its way into the theory as it is currently represented in our classrooms. Probably doesn't have anything to do with what Derek Bell was writing in terms of, microaggressions, but now it's part of it. It's being taught as fact. That's what people like me object to. They're acting like this is truth. And if you're watching this and going, but those are true, why don't you want to teach those to people? I just told you why. Why do I want to teach things that aren't actually true? Why shouldn't I teach the kids that some people believe the earth is flat? Why shouldn't I teach the kids that some people believe the earth was formed in 6 days and, is only 6,000 years old? Well, some people believe, a lot of people believe that. Millions of people believe that. We don't teach beliefs in school. We don't teach theories as facts in school. If you want to teach this theory to older students who have the vocabulary to debate you and think about it and have also, developed the reading skills and critical thinking skills to read the other opinions other than the critical race theories about race, that's fine. I personally don't love the idea, but if you're going to teach it, you should at least teach that it is a theory, not facts. Public and private schools are also training teachers, staff, administrators, and even parents on the elements of critical race theory, which school administrators see as an indispensable tool for dismantling what activists describe as America's racial caste system. Right now, this is editorializing, so I'm just reading from the article. A July survey by Education Week found that barely a year after the murder of George Floyd by a Minnesota cop, 8% of K-12 teachers said they have taught or discussed CRT with students. The figure for teachers in urban schools is much higher, 20%. Meanwhile, the Association of American Educators found in July that 4.1% of teachers were actually required to teach critical race theory, and 11% said that teaching CRT should be mandatory. Now, you might look at these numbers and say 4.1%, 11%. That's very small, Deb. Like, that's not really like a majority or anything. It's like a tiny amount of teachers. Well, these are the teachers responding to this survey. We have to also look at hard evidence of what's actually being done, not just what they think or what they've said. So let's continue. If those percentages hold true for the nation's estimated 2 million secondary school teachers in public and private schools, that would translate to more than 150,000 middle and high school teachers who teach or discuss CRT. See how like 4%, 11% can suddenly seem like a much different number when you say 150,000 teachers? It's a lot of teachers. And remember, too, that people who agree with these theories tend to be militant. They tend to be activist about it. It's inherent in the ideology to be activist. So if you're a teacher who doesn't agree with these things and you work alongside someone who does, and their position is you're a racist if you disagree with them, because that is what their position is, how likely are you going to be to voice a different opinion? How likely are you going to be to raise your hand and say, I don't want to do what they're doing, if it comes to pass that they pressure their administration to make you do it? A lot less likely, as we've seen in some districts where teachers are fighting back, like Ramona Bessinger and Frank McCormick. Our curriculum is deeply using critical race theory, especially in social studies, but you'll find it in English, language arts, and other disciplines. Detroit Public School Superintendent. Detroit Public School Superintendent. That is the person who is above all the principals and therefore all the teachers. Nikolai Vitti said in a November 9th Board of Education meeting, we were very intentional about creating curriculum, infusing materials, and embedding critical race theory within our curriculum. That's Detroit. I don't know how much more explicit you can get. CRT became a lightning rod in local, state, and national politics this year as conservatives and others exposed examples of schools separating students by race, and workplaces pressured employees to apologize for their white privilege and encouraging them to be less white. That was Coca-Cola. Progressives blame the controversy over CRT for helping fuel Republican Glenn Youngkin's upset win in Virginia's gubernatorial race, and observers say it could weigh down Democratic candidates in the 2022 midterms. The tragedy of all this is that it has become a polarizing thing, or it is assumed to be right versus left or Democrat versus Republicans, when I happen to personally know lots of Democrats who oppose critical race theory in the schools. So, you know, those of you who are Democrats who oppose it, you might want to get a little louder. Just saying. Not because I want you to elect your own candidates, because I don't, because a lot of them support the CRT stuff, but you might want to let people know that it's not some far right-wing fascist, conspiracy theory or belief system. It's not. It's actually fairly mainstream America to oppose racial essentialism in the classroom. Still, it perplexes CRT advocates who believe progressives should be embracing an idea that they equate with the inerrant truth about the pervasiveness of racism in the United States. And that's what I was talking about. It's not. And if you think, again, that this is just editorializing the article, here is what they're saying. These are their words. It seems foolish to engage in this subterfuge if CRT principles are part of the curriculum, said critical race theorist Andre Douglas Pond Cummings, a business law professor and co-director of the Center for Racial Justice and Criminal Justice Reform at the University of Arkansas School of Law. Now, that's a fairly important position. This person is, a business law professor and a co-director of a Center for Racial Justice and Criminal Law Reform at the University of Arkansas School of Law. Not Illinois, not New York, not California, right? But Arkansas. So even in the supposedly deep red South. And he teaches courses on business law, corporate justice, and hip hop and the American Constitution. This is what he says. CRT represents a true narrative from the perspective of Black and brown citizens, said Cummings, who doesn't capitalize his name. It's the way these Americans have experienced this country. He is speaking for millions of people as if they're a monolith. I personally know, as do probably many of you, people who consider themselves part of this supposed community, right? Black and brown citizens, if we're just going on looks alone, who absolutely disagree with critical race theory. They do not see it as the true narrative of their perspective. They see themselves as individuals. They see themselves as Americans. They don't have any doubt about the fact that they are Black Americans and that, that is how they are seen as well. But they don't think that the theory of race in America or racism in America is that this one is the one. They have other theories about racism in America, but nobody really wants to hear what they are or even talk to them because they're so busy saying this is what they think or this is what they should think. And if they don't, they're mouthpieces for white supremacy. That's not exactly what I would call inclusive, nor would I call it thinking at all. That sounds a lot more like, a faith that you must subscribe to. Jonathan Zimmerman, a professor of history at education at the University of Pennsylvania, my alma mater, believes it is educational malpractice not to teach students about critical race theory at the height of its cultural moment. It is educational malpractice not to teach students about critical race theory at the height of its cultural moment. But Zimmerman thinks it's perverse to teach it. And claim not to. Okay, well, at least he's honest. At least he's saying don't do it and then say you're not doing it, but I think it would be irresponsible not to do it. So he's doing it. Oh, by the way, the person who says that how Black and brown people experience the country is white. Just so you know. I mean, as long as we're talking about who knows how people experience the country, I think it's really rich for this guy right here to be telling Black people how they experience racism in America. But I will continue. He says, I think it's a defensive posture. He said of progressives, they know the Republicans have succeeded in demonizing it, and I don't think they have the confidence and the courage to defend it. I don't know that it's lack of confidence or courage to defend it. I think it is lack of real understanding for what it is they're defending. I really do. I think when you take on a belief system or an ideology because you've been told it will make you a good person or it's the truth, accept it because it is. And you don't want to contradict it because either you're white and you don't want to come across as racist or because you want to fit in with your tribe or your, identity group. And so you just accept it as truth because it's told to you by people who look like you or people who say that they stand for you and you want to belong. So when you assume beliefs based on those kinds of things, you're not in a position to defend them because you don't really understand them. Be like, defend Christianity when you were just raised in the faith and don't really know why you believe what you believe. It's just mom and dad taught it to me. You haven't actually compared it to atheism or Judaism or Buddhism or Islam or anything else to say, well, comparatively speaking, I believe this is true because I don't think that is true because this and that and the other. I mean, I know people who can do that, but a vast majority can't. And I think the same is true of people who are teaching critical race theory. If you come to something not by reason, but by unreason, you can't defend it. Not without bullying, not without just, this is so, which is what we see a lot. And we see it in classrooms. So I'll give him props for integrity, that he's saying don't be defensive and know what you're defending. And I'd like to see that because I think if they actually tried to defend it using the tenets and actually tried to say this is what we think and why we think it, it would be actually easier to fight it. Because then people using reason could come back and say, here's why we disagree with you. And we could actually have a debate. But as long as people are going to yell and scream and say, sinner, you're racist, there's no debate possible. Or I'm not debating with white people. You don't know my experience. Like, that's not a position of, courage or confidence. So he's right there. CRT is poised to grow at an unprecedented scale in Nicely's bellwether state of California, which in March approved ethnic studies model curriculum. Now, the ethnic studies model curriculum is geared heavily towards the Hispanic population because they have a large Hispanic population. So when you talk about critical race theory, which tends to be more about the Black experience or Black and brown experience, it's a little muddy, but the tenet is the same, that America is inherently racist, that racism is the natural order of things. It's not incidental. It's not an aberration. It's constant. It's baked into the systems. It's been there since the founding of the country and it has never abated. And that the only way to get rid of it is to become very racially conscious and call it out at every turn to identify with your particular racial ancestry, like glue and all these kinds of things that really sound like neo-segregationism, sound like you are putting race in a position where it's central to every conversation that you have. And there's really no hard evidence to suggest that these things are true. There's anecdotal evidence and there are stories, and they're leaning into stories and they're leaning into anecdotes to say this is as valuable as data. And I believe, and a lot of social scientists believe, that no, it isn't. It's not as reliable as data, and we can find contradictions for every single tenet to show how they are not so. But we can't have that debate openly because that makes us racist. So let's move on past that. So California is talking about how they adopted this and they're, fighting for it, and native pride, Black Lives Matter is baked into that, environmental justice, all of these Asian American political alliance. They're trying to get very tribal and very political within the public school. So I don't think there's any debate that that is actually happening. Then here we have somebody talking about, the ethnic studies curriculum, and it contains 90 direct or indirect references to CRT, like right in it. It's now mandated, so we know that's happening in California. These are the tenets that are considered self-evident truth, okay? They're questioning the very foundations of the liberal order as the source of anti-Black oppression, according to critical race theory. An introduction, a 2001 book, now in its third edition, that is used in high schools and universities. Classical liberal ideas such as free speech, equal treatment, and individual rights are not revered as sacrosanct constitutional guarantees, but regarded as hollow phrases and unearned privileges. Mere smokescreens created by white men to justify structuring social institutions for their own advantage that sometimes need to be scaled back to advance social justice. So what they're basically saying in a fancy way is we need to discriminate against white people, especially white men, because of past injustice. We need to punish people today for past injustice. What they're saying is they don't want the Bill of Rights to stand. They don't want equality under the law. They do want special privileges for Black and brown people. And that fundamentally changes America, folks. That fundamentally changes America. And so those of us who oppose this are saying we don't want to do that. And that really isn't an extremist position. Saying we don't want to fundamentally change America away from a country in which each individual person, not even citizen, each individual person has equal rights under the law. And that you do not play special favorites or give any kind of special due to somebody based on the color of their skin. They want to undo that. And their justification is because a long time ago in the past, special privileges were given to white people, mostly in the South, but whatever, because of the color of their skin. We need to do it now again. That's the only thing that's going to correct the record or correct things. But here's what they don't do. They don't talk about scale and substance, like when, where, and how much, to whom, all white people. What about the really, really poor white person in Appalachia? Or if you don't like the Appalachian example, how about like a homeless white veteran? Does that person deserve less of his equal rights under the law than, say, the upper middle class Black, financial analyst, simply because he's white? I mean, this is where it gets ridiculous. So they don't give you specifics. It's only based on the color of your skin. They can go on and on about intersectionality, but it's once you're white and male, or even white and female and cisgendered, or whatever it is, the term they use, you forget it. You're so low man on the totem pole that you just don't even have enough, victim cred to get what they consider to be the right to be treated a certain way under the law. They would call that unearned privilege for that person to have equal rights. And I just think that's crazy. They also don't identify an end point. So if this is meant to right the wrongs of the past, when will they be righted? When will we be done? When will the work be completed? When there are an equal number, literally, of Black CEOs? Because that's not even possible. You can't have 13% of the population and 60-some% of the population have equal numbers of people represented in every single industry, in every single field, and so forth. That doesn't even make logical mathematical sense. So what is the end? What's the end point? We're not given one, and neither are our kids. So what are they exactly fighting for? What would justice look like? We're not told. We're just told that the way things are now is injustice, and that's what our kids are being told, and that's why we disagree with it. In a groundbreaking 1995 article toward a critical race theory of education, the authors argued the U.S. society is based on property rights rather than human rights, and that racism is as healthy today as it was during the Enlightenment. The paper refers to white people as the oppressor and the perpetrator. Well, let me run you a special. Without property rights, you don't have individual rights. You don't have human rights. What is property? Property is the physical manifestation of your life, of your life's work and effort and time. And if not yours, maybe your parents or something like that. But it's somebody's life manifest solid is property. Even land, even if you have purchased land or inherited land, that is still a manifestation of somebody's effort. Okay? Even if it was taken 200 or 300 years ago, it had to be held, it had to be maintained, it had to be improved upon. So the improvements upon the land and so forth. So property is anything that is the physical manifestation of your life and your life's effort, your labor. Your own body is your property. How can you have freedom without property rights? You own yourself. Your body is your property. So I would like to see the world in which you aren't allowed to own property, but you're free. How does that work? So I go to work and I earn wages or earn money, but anything I buy with that I've just given my time and I've given my effort and I've done these things, and I then take the money that I get and I purchase property. But if I don't really own it, if I don't have rights to that, if those rights aren't protected and somebody can just come and take it, how is that any different really than what they complain about, where before there were such thing as property rights, Western Europeans came and just said, nobody's living on this exact plot of land, I'm just going to take it. I don't see a piece of paper saying you own this. I come from a culture where we do that way. We have to actually draw lines and have a survey and, purchase and exchange. And actually a lot of land was purchased, by the way, but it's a whole other video. But without property rights, people can just come and take your stuff. So this is not yours. But I gave my life to, think about the people of Kenosha. People might have spent 20, 30 years building a business, making it successful, taking a beat up old storefront and turning it into a successful little restaurant or a successful ice cream shop. And maybe it was feeding, 2 or 3 generations of a family and providing a roof over their heads and so forth. But if you say that it's not human rights to protect that property, it's okay if we burn it down in the name of social justice. How does that person have human rights? You've just stolen 30 years of their life. Gone. And you can say, well, they have insurance. All that the insurance is going to do is the insurance is going to possibly pay for, that damage, but they can't run the business without an insurance policy, which they're not going to get again because their business was burned down. If you're an insurance company, why are you writing a policy on that? That's a very high risk situation. It could happen once, it could happen again, especially in that location, because the powers that be have demonstrated they have no interest whatsoever in protecting your property, and your property then becomes of interest to the insurance company because they're carrying a liability against it. So this argument is hilarious to me. It's not hilarious. It's very disturbing. U.S. society is based on property rights rather than that is a nonsensical statement. Property rights are human rights. You cannot have human rights without property rights. Period. If you think about it, you will realize that is true. It sounds good though, doesn't it? That is a statement that appeals to people who young people, students who don't really own anything, but they'd like to own things, and they somehow don't understand that when they do own the things that they currently covet, they're going to want those property rights. They don't get it. They don't know enough economics. They don't know enough history. They don't understand social science. They don't understand politics. They don't understand what they don't understand, the breadth or depth of it. So if you're going to teach young people this and then say racism is healthy as today as it was in Enlightenment, I mean, as if the two things are related, as if you can't be an anti-racist society and have property rights, that's ridiculous. One of the things that was deprived of Black people in America was property rights. Why would you not want that for them? The right to their own body, to own themselves, first and foremost, was taken from them. They were deprived of that property right. They were then deprived of the right to actually own real property, physical property, for a very long time. I don't see how you have liberation or how you have anti-racist society without an absolutely vigorous defense of property rights for all. And this is literally in California high school graduation requirement mandates. They're saying the students can identify the tenets of critical race theory. Can they also identify the tenets of liberal enlightenment? Can they identify the tenets of, any other competing theory about racism in America? Probably not. Maybe that's what's needed, is we need an alternate theory that is as easy to put into little levels and teach to kids as this, because right now there's not much competition. Nobody's really teaching it. Nobody really understands what liberal enlightenment values really are. If what you're going to tell me is that property rights and human rights contradict each other, that's a gross misunderstanding of what property rights are. And just continuing on, let's see, we have more in California. There's a year-long course about, looking at things through a CRT lens. So obviously lots and lots in California, but this doesn't surprise anybody, does it? Now we're getting down to Maryland. Okay. Loyola University, Maryland School of Education said in a statement of solidarity, we encourage teachers to use CRT to initiate complex dialogues about systems, structures, and race in our country. These conversations are vital to the collective work of eliminating barriers to opportunity and success, and are intended to promote solidarity, compassion, and care. A whole lot of words to say a whole lot of nothing. Most of the people who are teaching this at the university level have absolutely no idea how these systems work that they claim are so faulty. They have no idea how individuals function within these systems. And to talk about collective work of eliminating barriers to opportunity and success, that's not something that's done as a collective. That just isn't. We eliminate barriers to opportunity and success by empowering individuals. When individuals have individual power to overcome the obstacles they encounter as individuals in their lives, which, by the way, is a lot easier to accomplish if you're a teacher, then you have fewer obstacles to opportunity and success. If you try to collectivize that and do that as a group, you're going to be spending the next 10 years arguing over what the barriers are. And you can't possibly anticipate them all. You're going to look at what they are today, but you can't anticipate what they're going to be in 12 years when the kid graduates. You look at them through a lens that is focused from the past, not even the present. It's just not helpful to the student. And solidarity, compassion, and care, I mean, these are not, hapless little victims that we're talking about. We're talking about individuals that have individual power in a free society if you let them have it. See, I'm skeptical that's what they really want. In fact, I don't believe it is. I think that's complete BS, but it sounds nice. Then they want to talk about the union is committed to, increasing the implementation of culturally responsive education, critical race theory, and ethnic studies curriculum pre-K, 12, and higher education. They put that in Ed Week. So this is the NEA, the largest union in the nation. Their the anti-racist resource guide issued this year contains the kind of statement that conservatives say is an example. I wish to stop saying that. It's not just conservatives saying it. An example of woke stereotyping and reverse racism that's being taught to school children as fact. White people are racially privileged even when they are economically underprivileged. Privilege and oppression go hand in hand. If you are teaching that to a minor child, you're abusing them. You're teaching something as fact that is not only not fact, but you are teaching them to hate. You are teaching them the culture of envy. You're teaching them the culture of separation. You're not teaching inclusion. You're not teaching compassion and care. You are setting them up to be divided from their peers and to see all the negatives that happen in their life as the result of external forces, which is just factually inaccurate. It's factually inaccurate in anybody's life who is not literally in bondage. Then, of course, we have, Republican lawmakers with the bans and so forth, et cetera, et cetera. Lots of bills. I've talked on this channel about how I'm not really a giant fan of these bans because they're impossible to implement and they put the focus in the wrong place, et cetera, and so forth. So I'm just not a fan. I think the answer to this problem is to go to the source and cut off the pipeline of these kinds of teachers in the first place to the universities. Most of these are taxpayer-funded universities. That needs to stop. We need to be putting people in our state boards of education who understand how this pipeline is fed and what is going on with teaching the teachers. And I also think we need real school choice, which means that we fund students, not systems. Because when parents can vote with their feet, then those who want CRT can go form their own little homeschool pods of CRT or their own micro school or their own private school or whatever and teach that version of, truth in American society and see how well that works out for your kids. I wish you wouldn't, but it is a free country. So I'm not going to ban you from doing it in a private capacity. However, in a public capacity, I think it's unconscionable. It is unconscionable to take taxpayer dollars and teach kids in the class that they are inherently bad. Marvin Lin, dubbed Loyola University, Maryland, as a renowned education and CRT scholar, dubbed by Loyola University, Maryland, said that conservatives are correct that CRT can be found in K-12 schools, but they exaggerate its influence because they assume every critique of systemic racism, structures of oppression, and whiteness comes from CRT, when many scholars and activists who have never studied CRT use this terminology. A distinction without a difference, sir. So what? So the term, they're not using the term, or CRT doesn't encompass all of the things. That is true. We can also, and this is the new narrative you should be on the lookout for, we can also look at the writings of Derek Bell and see that there were certain things in there that he and I would have agreed on, namely that we shouldn't have forced integration of the schools because that will destroy communities, and it takes the wrong approach. It's a box-checking approach to integration and to desegregation, and it treats the Black child as like a thing that you can move around to different places and doesn't take into account their unique situation and keeping the integrity of their communities and so forth and so on. I think it was terrible for Black children to force integration. But I've said that on this channel and being accused of being racist. So you believe in segregation? Of course not. I do not believe in legal segregation, but nor do I believe in forced integration. I do not. I believe these things should have been handled organically, and I do believe that communities should have been encouraged to stay together because they just should have been given equal access to dollars and equal opportunity to learn as the kids across town. So if they were apportioning the dollars unfairly and unequally, which we know they were, that should have been remedied at that time. That is very different than box checking representative integration, which is what was done. So Derek Bell and I even would have agreed on that, but that doesn't mean I agree with CRT or 99% of the other stuff that he said. So I'm sure there are plenty of teachers running around using all kinds of terms that don't, strictly speaking, fall under CRT, but so what if they're teaching the same ideas, the same tenets? So it's not CRT's influence, but it's the same kind of racial essentialism. So what? He says, before we were even a nation, we were a slave state, Lynn said. If that's your culture, if that's the way you were raised up, why would you think there's anything wrong with suppressing and oppressing people based on their race? Nobody alive today was raised that way. And the culture of the United States stopped being that way well over a century ago. Well over. And abolition was born in 1775. The idea of and the commitment to abolition, and then it really swung into gear in the 1830s. So I think we are many years on since that. Not only that, we did not have rampant slavery in the North in the beginning of this country. There was slavery in the North, but not like the South. So it's not this it's in your DNA nonsense, because if something is in your DNA, you can't change it. And that's what he wants you to believe. He wants you to believe, if that's how you were raised up, if that's in your culture, why would you think anything's wrong? But nobody alive today was raised that way. So he's conflating where the country came from and the birth of this country and what we were like 250 years ago, or even 150 years ago, with what we are now. He sees a direct line from the whites of the antebellum South to white people today. And no, I'm sorry, that is his opinion. It is unsupported by facts. In fact, I think if he were willing to have an open debate with scholars on the other side, they could easily put him on a stage with Thomas Sowell. They could easily prove that is false. So he should not be going, or none of his trained teachers should be going into a public school classroom and teaching that as fact, and yet they are. And that is what I oppose. He says, if you're going to change hearts and minds, you have to engage in a significant education project. He doesn't want to change hearts and minds. He wants to mold them. He wants to indoctrinate them and to agree with him. I don't want kids to specifically agree with my theory of racism in America. I want them to form their own opinion based on their own readings in their own time after they actually learn how to read, which isn't really happening right now, because we're focusing so much attention on race, 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 gender, gender, gender. It's literally 90% of what they're doing in school anymore, they've infused every part of the curriculum with it in too many schools, large urban schools, especially, as I've just read to you. So it's there. You've heard the words of the people who are supporting it. You've heard what they believe. So now don't believe the lies that, no, this is an exaggeration or racist dog whistle and it's imaginary. It doesn't exist. It does. They're committed to it. Now, if you personally think you can get it out of the schools and go up against these folks who are teaching all of the new teachers going into the schools, I wish you the best of luck. I personally don't think it's possible, as I've said many, many times. So if you like this sort of content or find it useful, I hope you will consider subscribing to the channel. Join my locals at thereasonwelearn.locals.com. And please like, share, and comment on the video. Thanks for watching.